Welcome back to Licks of the Beast. I'm Nico, and this video is something new for me because it's something I haven't yet done at all on the channel. And that is to share my point of view on a current topic in the world of music. So if you've been following me for some time, you might have noticed that I'm very passionate about music and that I like to look at things in a rather analytical way. So as I watch all these videos on here by a variety of different people talking about all these different things like music creation, performance, trends, concerts, the current and future state of the industry, etc., I feel like I have something to say about all that. So I decided it was about time I got in on the discussion. And I'll start with this recent debate that didn't necessarily begin with Rick Beato, but that has definitely picked up a lot of traction with some of his latest videos. Now, for those of you who are not aware of the topic, Rick Beato, who's a very successful and highly respected YouTuber who owns a recording studio in Atlanta, and who's been involved in the music industry as a writer, producer, educator, performer, arranger, etc., has made a few videos highlighting what he considers to be a decline in the role that music occupies in the lives of the younger generation, as well as the general quality of the talent and the compositions. Now, the video that really got people talking recently is the one entitled "The Real Reason Why Music is Getting Worse," and I'll link to it in the description of this video for reference. Some of his points were received favorably, but the overall gist of his message definitely was not. In fact, it spawned multiple reaction or response videos, and while I can absolutely understand how some of Rick's comments might have caused some people to get their backs up a little, I can't help but feel like there's some nuance that might have been overlooked. And this is a topic that I feel quite strongly about because I consider myself extremely fortunate to have grown up at a time where music was one of the most important things in the lives of young people. The music you listened to defined who you were and came with its own subculture, fashion habits, and adjacent or complementary interests. Now, while that still might be the case for some, I don't believe this is still universally true. And semantics aside, anyone who's experienced both eras will tell you that things are indeed changing. That's not to say that things are necessarily worse overall, because some things are undeniably much better. For example, the lifestyle of a rock musician is a lot healthier, both physically and mentally. Being intoxicated every day is no longer something we glorify, and mental health has become increasingly a priority. And I think this is huge progress. Also, with the internet, YouTube, forums, and other ways that people could get instruction and information freely and easily, musicians are getting better faster, to the point where some of the guitar heroes that we used to idolize back in the day sometimes seem maybe a little sloppy in comparison to even a 14-year-old kid who's only been playing for like 3 or 4 years. So with this video, I want to address the two main points that Rick was making, as well as the general response to them. And then I'll give you my personal opinion from my own point of view. Now, the aim here is not to take sides or to accuse anyone of anything, but just to try to bring the discussion to a point where we're all talking about the same things. But before I start discussing Rick Beato's points, I'd like to give you my position on whether or not music is actually getting worse. And again, I'm all about nuance because that is really how life is. Looking at things as dichotomies is great for marketing and politics, but I found that more often than not, things are not quite so cut and dry. So if we're talking about pop music, there's a good case to be made for the idea that it's gotten a little worse overall. I think songwriters have become very good at writing pop hits, and this is both good and bad because on the one hand, the overall quality of the songs and how they're recorded and produced is perhaps more consistent today than ever before. But they're also more formulaic songs, where you can tell which boxes were checked, and that there's been an overall simplification of the instrumentation and the arrangements. Perhaps too much even. Now, say what you want about the 1980s, but the pop music of that decade was extremely diverse, and some of the songs had really interesting arrangements. Karma Chameleon by Culture Club, Easy Lover by Phil Collins, Loverboy by Billy Ocean, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics, Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, Every Breath You Take by The Police. These songs had virtually nothing in common, yet they were all pop hits. Now, I don't really listen to a lot of pop music at all, but going by what I hear around me in public places, I'm not hearing songs of the same caliber as the ones I just mentioned. In terms of heavy metal music, which is what I'm more interested in, especially as far as this channel goes, I think things might be both better and worse depending on how you choose to look at it. Now, as a quick example, in 1984, you had 40 years less of material to account for. That means your main goal when writing a song was simply to make something that sounded and felt great. You didn't have to avoid sounding like 40 more years of metal bands. You weren't trying to avoid copying 40 more years of iconic riffs and melodies. You weren't trying to outdo all of that great music with the immense staying power it's had until now. Now, these limits are bound to make it more difficult to put out music that will connect with people in the same way as the first time someone heard Holy Diver in the early 80s. Also, musicians didn't have to worry about things like being relevant on social media to stay top of mind among the incredibly vast competition, or to be so technically perfect in order to keep up with the many 14-year-old kids on Instagram who could already shed like Petrucci. So they could put all their time into writing the strongest material they could and to make it appealing, with the added bonus of having that little aura of mystery that is no longer possible in the current era. On the positive side, artists are no longer expected to release a new album every 12 to 18 months while doing massive world tours plus interviews and appearances in between. So that results in artists being able to put more thought into their work and having the time it takes to create and capture the music closer to how they originally envisioned it. They also tend to be more skilled, as they benefit greatly from the work of those who came before. So instead of spending months and years figuring out how to perform the various techniques, a novice player can get a jump on all that stuff thanks to the many tutorials that are available right here on YouTube. So if they put in the same amount of time and effort as someone did when all they had to go on was their record player and a few guitar magazines, they're going to get a lot better a lot faster. Now, does that make the music necessarily better? No. But it might make it sound better. And there's also effort put into studying composition and learning from these great artists that came before. Then perhaps it can lead to objectively better songwriting overall. Before we continue, I'd like to take a quick minute to tell you about a few different ways that you could support the channel. If you're not already subscribed, the first thing you can do is hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you always know when we put out a new video. Likes and comments are also greatly appreciated as they let YouTube know that you are engaging with this channel and that you want to keep seeing videos from Licks of the Beast on your homepage. I always include the list of gear used for each video, and some of those items will have links next to them. If you shop at Sweetwater, you can click one of those links first and I'll get a small commission from that purchase without it costing you anything extra. Finally, you can check out our website licksofthebeast.com, where you can buy some cool merch like this t-shirt with the names of all the guys in Iron Maiden, or this one with the Licks of the Beast logo. You can also download tabs for the tutorial so that you can follow along and book a virtual guitar lesson with me. Your support is so important to the growth and sustainability of the channel. Most of these actions won't cost you anything at all, and of course, they are all hugely appreciated. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, the downside is that if everyone follows the consensus of what is objectively great, then you might not have as much of that uniqueness that made some of those classic albums so special. And this is what I meant when I said I find the argument to be very nuanced. Okay, now let's get to Rick Beato's video. So his first point is that music has become too easy to create.
What do I mean by music is too easy to make?
Now here, Rick is mainly focusing on technology and how it's used in the recording process. He addresses things like quantizing, which is basically adjusting the timing of a performance so that the subdivisions of the notes are as close to perfectly in time as the artist wants them to be. This can be very useful when it comes to fine-tuning a small part here and there of an otherwise great performance, thereby saving time and money in the studio. The other side of this is that it can make music sound overly precise, thus robbing it of its natural groove. This can make the performance feel somewhat uncanny and not quite human. One example he gives is how a band can start by quantizing the drum part, and then the bass has to be adjusted too so that it's not off with the drums, and then that means that you have to move the guitar parts around a bit. And eventually you end up with a mix that is perfectly in time, but that ultimately sounds sterile without those little rhythmic idiosyncrasies that result in what we generally refer to as feel. So he's not arguing against the technology as a tool. What he seems to be arguing against is the use of quantizing in the extremes. So on one end, it might be used to make mediocre musicians who haven't put in the work sound like professionals who have, except without the feel that makes those professionals so highly sought after. On the opposite end, you can take a perfectly good performance that might not be metronomically perfect and overcorrect it through quantizing in order to reach that perfection, at the expense, though, of the more natural feel of the imperfect take. So when I see those reactions saying Rick is being elitist or a musical snob or whatnot, that's not what I'm hearing at all. I think the point he's making is a lot more nuanced than that. Another example he gives is that it's become all too easy to get good recorded sounds when it comes to instruments like drums and guitars. It used to be very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive, and generally required the assistance of a sound engineer who knew what they were doing. Nowadays, you can get amazing sounding drum samples and amp modelers for a ridiculously small amount of money. Now, this makes the entire process easier and faster, but also much more homogenized because tools like these, especially when you consider the learning curve that often includes online forums and videos, will inevitably come with a general consensus of what a good sound is and how to achieve it quickly. Which means a lot more people can make recordings that sound good in a very similar way. Now, on this point, a lot of the backlash seems to be focused on the idea that this is a good thing because it allows a lot more musicians to be able to record their songs properly without having to go through the artist screwing machine that was the music industry back in the day. And this is absolutely 100% true, mostly from the point of view of the musician. From the point of view of the average listener, it might not necessarily be such a good thing in every aspect, because it means that they'll have a lot more to sift through in order to find that really special, unique sounding album that speaks to them in a particular way. His second point is that music has become too easy to consume.
Think about this. All of the music that exists, or at least it's been uploaded to Spotify or Apple Music, is available for $10.99 a month.
And this is where some people accused Rick of being an old man yelling at clouds, or even worse, of just making rage bait content. Truthfully, I understood exactly what Rick was trying to express because it's something that I've thought about as well. The thing is, when you try to translate those thoughts to a video that will be informative but still entertaining, it's going to be really difficult to express all of that without turning it into an overly lengthy history lesson. Because to someone who experienced the days of scrounging up money to buy that one album and then really treasuring it, devouring the music and lyrics and soaking up every detail of the cover art and every word in the liner notes, the way music is consumed today is so obviously different that it truly goes without saying. Now, I don't think Rick's point was that people in the 70s and 80s appreciated music more because they could buy it, whereas today you can just stream it without having to purchase each album individually. What I think he was trying to say is that because it's so easy to have all of it all at once without having to commit to any of it, things become overly saturated real quick, and you cannot possibly digest all of it in a truly deep and meaningful way. Not only that, but you also run the risk of consuming all of it superficially. The argument I'm hearing against this is typically that Rick isn't mentioning all of the copycat bands and the tons of music that the record labels were putting out throughout the decades just as an attempt to cash in on the latest trend. But the thing is, the fact that it was out there didn't matter as much because there was no easy and cost-effective way for the average person to consume or even be aware of all of it at one time. And that's exactly Rick's point. And this is why he was suggesting that people periodically make a point of listening to music with intent away from any type of distraction, especially smartphones. This is so that for that brief but meaningful moment, you can truly immerse yourself in the music without anything else getting in the way of your experience. And that is what I think a lot of people might have misunderstood about Rick Beato's recent videos. To me, it seems like he's more concerned with the listener's experience. And that's very important because as a musician and a creator, I definitely enjoy the fact that it's easier for me to get a good guitar sound and to get my videos out there. But if I'm doing so to an audience that is saturated and doesn't really care if there is one more or one less video on this platform, then it doesn't really matter. As for the idea that he's just putting out rage bait, Realistically, a guy with Rick's background who has the ability to produce high-quality content like the What Makes This Song Great series or the long-form interviews with absolute monsters like Satriani and Vai, Yngwie, Robert DeLeo, Nuno, and Sting, a guy like that has no interest in producing rage bait, nor does he have anything to gain from it. Now, I'm not suggesting that Rick Beato is infallible or that he can't ever get it wrong. After all, he's only human, and his knowledge and experience, for however rich it may be, is bound to have limits. Still, while I think it's good to always keep an open but critical mindset and to be wary of not falling prey to hero worship, I also think that one shouldn't forget that the person behind the words is a guy who does know a whole lot about the music industry and how it runs. Now, I think this can be the start of a constructive conversation that leads to a better future for both musicians and music fans alike. And I sincerely hope that it will be. Thank you all so much for watching. Cheers, guys.